So we'll start with some of the questions that were sent earlier. People sent us a few questions, and I thought if it's okay with all of you, we can start with some of those questions. What an auspicious number to have on the board, 108. Okay. Right, funny. But so one of the questions that people were talking about was the whole concept of death, afterlife, preparations for the afterlife, and things like that. So there were many questions. So if it's okay with all of you, with your permission, may I put all these? I mean, may I tabulate these questions into, say, 3 or 4 major ones rather than 15, 20 minor ones? Okay, somebody has said yes. So let's do this. So Falguni wants to know how. Gautam wants to know what is the immediate experience of death after death. So first thing, I want to confess to all of you that I have died many times, just like most of you have. If you can stop asking questions, then otherwise it'll all just carry on, and I won't be able to go back. So if you can just wait till we finish 5-7 minutes and then put more questions. So the thing is, I do not remember my last death, because after you are born, for the first 40 days, the child has what they say a memory of the past, and then that memory fades away, and then you become the sad sack that destiny has in store for you. So I don't remember my past death. But fortunately, I had many experiences of partial death, which is out of the body experience. So maybe we can take those experiences and build a set of dots to connect for after death. The truth about death is, I don't think anybody has the same explanation as the other. Whether you look at I haven't read it, but if you look at the Tibetan Book of the Dead, I did take a summary from someone to look at, but I found it too theoretical, technical. Our own scriptures are not agreeing with each other on what happens exactly after death. So there is a lot of conjecture, but very powerful conjecture, very strongly accepted conjecture. So we will have to separate the conjecture with whatever experiences we have all had. And if any of you have had experiences, please start typing them down, because by the time it reaches us, it will take 3 to 5 minutes. So what happened, what I believe happened to me after death was, the first thing was my body, Gurudev initiated this kind of concept, and I used to sleep on the gaddi where he used to sit and do seva. That's always a very powerful place. And he used to insist that I should sleep there. So I would do that a few times when I was staying in his house. And on one of those occasions, what happened was, I was asleep and awake at the same time. My eyes were shut and open at the same time. I could see through my shut eyes with some kind of open eyes. And I found my body floating inside my body. So I found something floating inside my body, which I am assuming was my spirit body, and it could move a little to the left, right, it could move a little to the up front, top, bottom, and it was almost like it had a 2-inch or a 3-inch movement on all sides. So when that happened, of course I didn't understand what that meant. Of course I could not figure out what it was meant to indicate. But over the years, I realized that this was the loosening or the detaching of some sort of my spirit body, so that he could then initiate my astral travel. So that was the beginning. But the first time I came out of the body, Gautam, I don't think I have been more confused than that in my life, not even with an algebra sum. And I was bad at algebra. But I was never as confused as I was on that occasion, because I could not understand what to do. I was floating in the middle of the room, halfway between the ceiling and the floor, and I couldn't straighten up. I couldn't stand. I didn't know how to handle myself. It was just free float, unlike the Indian currency. So I discovered, I think intuitively at that time, that I need to will myself. So I willed myself. I'm talking to you about death because that's the subject we are discussing. And I'm explaining to you some of the experience I had, not in death, but in out of the body experiences. So that might be relatable to quite an extent for those who have recently joined. So I then had to will myself, and I willed myself to stand, and I was standing, and I willed myself to move, and I moved. And that's how I learned how to move. So that was my first experience after death. So I'm going back to some of the old questions. Can the Jivatma of an evolved person take rebirth to earn dollars after death? Is a question by Pooja. Actually, a Jivatma of an evolved person will take birth to evolve further because they've got the taste of that blood, and they understand that if they time it right, if they will it right, if they can prepare themselves well, then every lifetime can be a positive add-on experience. So a Jivatma of an evolved person does want to take rebirth and earn dollars after death. I didn't understand that part of the question. Yeah, I guess, yeah, okay. I have asked this on the blog as well. Even though I don't feel attached to the physical form of people, how do I detach myself from the death of people, even those whom I have never met? Even those who I have never met in my life, when I see death, it really bothers me and I get emotionally drained and it affects me. How do I deal with that? Is a question by Ritu. I think understanding is a great solution. Acceptance is a great solution. In fact, a thought that's coming to my head is one should learn to flirt with death. Flirting with death. Of course, it's a catchy phrase, but then all of you are the kind of people who only like catchy phrases. And if I were to, pick up one of those Sanskrit shlokas and give it to you, I think we would fall from 200 to 4 or 200 to 10 people, including me, I'd be missing. So, we are not the kind of people, most of us, which want to delve into the theoretics and the mugging it up and all that kind of thing. So, I want you to think about the concept of what is flirting with death. So how did this idea come into my mind? Ritu, the idea did not come into my mind. It was Gurudev who 35 years ago mentioned to me. He says, as your surname is Tendon, I think you'll understand what a little bit of Punjabi. But he said, कि मौत नू अपने नाल लेके फिरिया कर, something like that. So what he meant was, keep death as a companion, or walk around with your death. It took me a long time to understand that. But I was wondering, what is he talking about? How do I take death as a companion? Like everywhere I go, do I say, hello, death, where are you? Are you coming with me or not? I don't think he meant it in such a sort of a gross manner. So this is the lesson he gave me, and it took a long time for me to figure it out. And then I realized what I think he meant to me was I should not look at death as a fear. I should not look at death as a threat, but I should look at death as a friend. Now that's not exactly making sense. Death as a friend? Of course it doesn't make sense. But let's widen the scope of the word friend into saying, let me not look at death as if it's a threat to me, or if it's an enemy to me, or if it's going to hurt me, or it's going to mess up my existence, or it's going to ruin me. No. I realize that I should look at death as an eventuality, that I should look forward to. And I should also earn the benefits of death during life, which was the purpose of life anyway. One of the things I want to discuss with you is a subject that I have been doing a little bit of R&D on, and that is the Mahurat of death. This I have known for a long time, that death has an expiry time, which means it has to affect you within 9 minutes. So if death misses you for 9 minutes, or if you can escape death for 9 minutes, I think it's 9 minutes, but with my kind of memory, it could have been 25 minutes, 30 minutes, I don't know. But I don't know why I remember 9 minutes. And possibly because also there's a Navams. In a horoscope, you have a Navams, which is multiple parts of a birth chart is divided into Navamshas. There are 108 of them. So one of those Navamshas is approximately 9 minutes. So maybe that's why I believe that the Mahurat of death can happen only in those 9 minutes. And if you miss it, then it has to have another Mahurat. So I learned through experience of one of my spiritual associates. I learned that we tried to meddle with her mother's death, and we knew she's going to die, and we tried to do some things, and we beseeched Gurudev, and a lot of us sort of requested Gurudev to save her and extend her life, which he did. But after that, it was years before she could die. It was years before she could die. And she was suspended in a kind of a semi-coma or whatever. I don't remember. It was 20, 25 years ago. I realized at that time that until a perfect Mahurat did not come, that woman's death would not happen. And therefore, I would like to share this thought with all of you, is death must come when it is meant to come, and one should not play games with it. But so the Mahurat of death, in my opinion, is very significant. This is my own conclusion. I have done homework on it. I've had many people's horoscopes made after they died, and I also realized that the kind of life a person has led was often reflected in the Mahurat of their death charts, which I got made as birth charts. And I got an astrologer, because I don't understand the subject. So I got an astrologer to read this as the birth of a child. And then one of the very interesting things that happened was when Gurudev's wife, Mataji, died, I was worried, because I was aware that that period of those month or month and a half when she was in a very unstable state of affairs in terms of her health, she was in coma for 20 odd days, and I was wondering why. I mean, I know that Gurudev he had no problem. He could have just come and just picked her up and walked off, or flown off from there. Why was that period of those 21 days? And she wasn't even talking to anybody. She was in coma. She was in suspended animation. So when she died, I got a Mahurat chart made. And what did that chart show? That it's a very lousy birth of a very ordinary person. That spooked me. So I called up her son and I said, listen, I know you're going through a lot of grief, but I need one small information from you. Give me the exact time of her death. So because I know him well, so he was kind enough to tell me the time of her death, which was 2 hours away, or either earlier or later than the one given to me by one of the Sevadars. So I got another horoscope made. And this horoscope showed the birth of a queen. Now, could this be a coincidence? Of course it could be. When many of the ladies of the Sthan, the older ladies of the Sthan, who were above 80, etc., when they died, I did experiment with their horoscope, because I knew them, and I knew their spiritual quotients, and I knew how much bhakti they had done, how much seva they had done. And they all seem to justify the Mahurat of their death. So what am I saying therefore? The Mahurat of the death is going to be the Mahurat of the death. So there are two messages in this. Message number one should never meddle with death. Message number two, the Mahurat of the death will be justifiable to the karma and the gunas and the attachments, detachments, the sensory, consciousness, or growing out of the sensory consciousness, all these attainments that you might have worked towards. This is what the Mahurat of death is the result of, is the fruitification of, and therefore I consider that very significant. So now here are some answers. Sandhya says, according to me, flirting with death, she's talking about that. It's a kind of being prepared and accepting the fact that death is essential and real. And flirting with death is to be prepared to leave whenever there's a call. And flirting, and what? And flirting actually means that we are more casual and comfortable with the concept of death. So the fear of death does not actually create a constant fear. I feel it's basically a comfort that we must have with the concept of death. And this is the way I see it. Great. I think it's a beautiful answer. I don't think you need me to make Ritu says flirting with death would mean toying with the idea of dying. So nice answers. If I may be allowed to add one or two more pages to this book. I believe, I'm not going to play on the word flirting, though I'm almost tempted by using the concept of flirting in this. When you flirt with somebody, you must like that person, otherwise why would you flirt with that person? And secondly, if you want to go out on a date and flirt with someone, I think you need to prepare yourself, the kind of things you will say, the kind of attitudes you will have, the way you dress, the way you, whatever you do. If you're a woman, then my God, God knows what all you need to do, but most men are very lackadaisical about preparation. But whatever it is, the question is, there is preparation in flirtation, and just a forceful use of the term. But how does one prepare for death? For me, I like the idea of humanizing it. I wish it was my own idea. But you know, most of these guys have beaten me to my ideas by a few thousand years, which is unfair. Because I conceived that idea myself and then I realized somebody else had thought of it also earlier. So I don't know whether I'm upset with them or not. Of course, it's a joke. But Buddha gave me this concept when he talked about a character called Mara. And he humanized temptation. He humanized counterbalance of evolution, and said that Mara was a person who was a demon, who was always trying to destroy his tapasya, his sadhana, by creating temptations about women, creating temptations about God knows what. I don't remember Buddhism very well. But Mara was the creation of a humanization of negative energy by Buddha, and I thought that was an amazing idea. It was an amazing, brilliant idea. So I decided that I should humanize death. Now, when I say humanize death, I'm not talking about saying, okay, death, you're a Yam Doot or a Yam Raj. No. I'm saying humanize death to be a kind of person who comes to pick you up for a picnic or a date, a long one, a date of many days, many years, many decades, whatever. But someone who comes to pick you up and take you to a different location. So I decided that for me, humanization was a great way to flirt with the idea of death. Then another way that I understand, and I understand this very well, and I want you to understand this, is preparing for death means attaining a lot of Shakti, energy, power, enhancement of aura, and other things. So if we mix everything else, then we'll go away from the main highlight of the point is attaining Shakti. How does one do that? I think all of you probably know that, but if you don't, Mantra Vidya preparation of or refixing your gunas and seva are three ways, and tapasya. So mantra vidya I'm using mantra vidya for tapasya, but say tapasya or mantra vidya or sadhana, these are so many words, all of them almost mean similar stuff. So I'm saying that helps you to energize yourself and enhance your Shakti. And that becomes a very major preparation for death, because after death, energy is a critically important ingredient. If money is important in life, you cannot imagine how much more energy is important in the afterlife. So I would say that is another way I would flirt with death, is by enhancing energy levels. Then fears. See, the fear of death, it's a beautiful sentence from, I think it's from Shakespeare, from Julius Caesar, when I don't know who says this, I think Brutus says it, or Julius Caesar says it. He says, cutting off 20 years of life is cutting off 20 years of fearing death. I mean, it's not a very sensible sentence, but it sounds brilliant. So you have to take the essence of what it sounds like, not what it means like. It means, what I'm trying to say is, fear of death is a challenge. It makes you nervous. It doesn't keep you standing with your head high. You become weak and therefore are not in a position to hold your own. And therefore, I would say that understanding death rather than fearing it would be another way to learn how to flirt with it. Another thing that one needs to understand about death is that death is nothing but a continuity and a change. It's a change of an intermediary life between another life. If you've been a lousy person, if you've been a horrible person with horrible deeds, who has bought the guilt and who has understood himself or herself to be mean, nasty, horrible, evil, whatever. People say, I'm not a witness to any of these things, except once I was a witness, but people say that Gurudev used to say that very often your karmic balances are looked upon before your next yoni or your next what is yoni called in English? I don't know. Please find the word. But your next form of birth, yes, your next form of birth is decided. I have never experienced this except once, when there was a person who Gurudev was treating, and I was in the room, and that person was possessing someone, and that person was asked by Gurudev to leave that person's body, which he did. And then he begged Gurudev, he tried to trick Gurudev first by saying, you take some water 3 times and clear a path for me. So Gurudev laughed because he knew what it meant, and what this spirit was actually trying to, I don't know whether he's doing it trickishly or just sense of expectation or whatever, or sense of entitlement. He wanted Gurudev to actually take that water and clear a path for him to escape this dimension and to get out of this earthly plane. And then when Gurudev did not do that, there was a dog outside. So he said, give me entry into the body of this dog. And I was completely shell-shocked. I can't even think of a fact that a human being would want to be alive in the body of a dog. I do not know what were the circumstances of that person. So it's very difficult to be a judge without facts. But the little facts that were there in that room and the experience that I was having, it was shocking. So understanding that death is a continuity, and appreciating the fact that you've had a good life, if you have, and if you've done good things, then fearing death is purely an act of ignorance, not an act of knowledge. So I would recommend you don't fear death. And instead of fearing death, please look at doing things that would make your death a powerful and a good one. Another thing, yes, I forgot. One of the ways I would like you to prepare, or I like you to flirt with death, is please do not, besides fears, get rid of fears, but besides that, please do not harbor guilt. By harboring guilt, you are actually preparing yourself for a not so great death, or an afterlife rather, and you are going to land up with wanting to punish yourself. And when you make when the day of judgment comes, which is a very Catholic sentence, but there is some value to that sentence. I don't know whether it's a day of judgment or whether it's a week of judgment, or people have all said that when they died they saw a reflection of their entire lives so that they could evaluate their lives. So Christianity that way has a very nice way of explaining it in a very simple manner. And on that day of judgment, if you're having a lot of guilt, then you're going to have a lot of suffering that you will need to redesign for yourself. So flirting with death is understanding it, understanding that it's an intermediary process, realizing that you need to get more power, humanizing it, and learning to be forgiving. I forgot that. If I am a not so forgiving person, my afterlife is going to be one where I am going to demand revenge and vengeance from others. That actually becomes a noose around my own neck. Because let us say Sandhya met me one day in a coffee shop, hit me on the head with a frying pan. These days people serve, roasties and things in frying pans, so I'm not talking rubbish. There is a lot of frying pan service happening all over the country with continental food. So if she were to take a frying pan, hit me on my head, and I was to hold this against her, and I was to ask for vengeance after I died, and let us say I died with that frying pan. So it would not be from the frying pan to the fire, it would be from the frying pan to the afterlife. But if I did not forgive her, then I would need to get entangled with her again. And I would be happy to be entangled with you, Sandhya, but not in this manner. Not in this manner. I would hate to have to want to see you suffer, and I would hate to be entangled in vengeance with you. So forgiveness as an attitude, and you can't do it in the last minute, by the way. You can't prepare for death the day you're going to die. Actually, you might be able to. We'll talk about that later. But generally speaking, I think one needs to do rehearsals. One shouldn't just pad up, pick up a bat and a helmet and say, "Dekhte hain." Upon death, is one reborn immediately or is one in suspense? So there's a lot of conjecture about this. I think there is no hard and fast rule. The Buddhist monks claim to be reborn within a few days, and I believe the shortest span that you can be reborn in is 17 days or 41 days or whatever, I don't know. But final decisions and all settlements of the afterlife happen, I believe, after 17 days. So after some time you can be reborn. I have heard of cases where Gurudev gave birth to a snake who was actually a rishi with a curse. I have heard, I wasn't present, but one of my Guru Bhais was present, and he told me the whole story and how this happened. And then later on, he showed this snake to the same person in the form of a girl child, and he said, "Look for the marks of a snake." And that guy found this kind of, I don't know, whatever the snake marks are, whatever. And so it was a great experience for that person. How to earn higher speed gati for liberation to reach higher dimension in intermediary state, journey of life after death and in between death and rebirth. So, Vinay, that's a great question to ask. Charity, death, can be called as earning dollar after that. Okay, so I think Vinay's question is कि गति कैसे मिलती है? I have not a single clue, because I was given gati about 30 years back. Gurudev sent his senior most disciple Malhotra ji, who came into my vision state and told me that he has been sent to teach me the art of gati. And then he taught me many things in that out. It was not even out of the body experience. It was in my spirit experience, and I do not know in that vision state how did he manage it, but he managed it. He taught me about how gati happens. He taught me how to press on some, there were no levers, but how to use pressure of the mind, etc., etc. And I don't remember it. But after that day, earlier on, whenever I had out of the body experience, I used to fly like a microlight, which, believe me, is a much greater fun flight than an aeroplane or a rocket. But that microlight, one could just casually float over the sea, over the land, and I used to go across the not across the sea, but I used to fly over the sea in the first 2, 3, 4 times. I enjoyed that. A lovely view, scenery, whatever rubbish I could conclude out of all that. But after this gati experience happened, I realized that I could fly at much faster speeds, and to the point that I reached a level where I could fly at a speed where I couldn't see anything around me, except I could hear the sound of a zzz, like a Z, more of a bee sound or a honeybee sound or whatever you want to call it. And the moment that happened a couple of times or few times, I once almost got lost. And I reached a spot far away, and then I didn't know how to get back. And that made me nervous. And this I'm talking out of the body. And that nervousness must have helped. And I'm not recommending it to you, but I do not know what helped. But whatever happened, I found myself coming back in in a short period of time. It wasn't a very short period of time, but it was a short period of time, maybe few minutes, but not few seconds. Definitely 5, 6 minutes or 3, 4 minutes. And then I found myself back in the body, and then I don't know what happened. And I woke up the next morning to remember the incident. So Guru bin gati nahi is what is said. It's not my sentence. It's a sentence that was coined, I don't know in which Upanishad or which Veda or whatever, but it's a very old, old jungle saying kind of sentence, ke Guru bin gati nahi. For me, it has been a truth. My Guru did give me gati, and some of the people I mentor will also get gati, and unless they already have it, and when their time of death arrives, they will be able to travel at high speeds. Does putting someone on a ventilator also mean meddling with the Mahurat of death? That's a tough one, Richa. I don't know. I don't know because I don't know whether the person who is on the ventilator has died or not. If that person's brain is alive, when I say the brain, I mean that shriveling at the back of the head. If that is still functioning, the person is alive. And if it has been put on the ventilator, then maybe it is the part of that person, like Mataji's case, Guru Mataji's case, she was on a ventilator for 20 days. And she was probably not even in her body, but she was probably traveling out of the body and then probably coming back for breakfast or whatever. I'm just joking. But she was probably traveling out of her body because she could do that. And she might have been spending time with her ex-husband. I don't think he's her husband, he's her ex-husband. And or she might have been doing other things, I don't know. But I think the death of a person is when the ventilator plug is removed. I think so. Sir, Lord Krishna shown the reality of spirit to Arjun by showing his Virat Roop. Gurudev done same to many of his disciples. How about layman people like us who theoretically read and listen about spirit? Somewhere it's not clear to visualize this concept without any practical understanding. What is the solution here? Somewhere logic says it's only creating a perception for a lookout. Bankim. Virat Roop is the ability of the elasticity of the spirit. Uh, and I'm saying this theoretically, because whenever I have been out of my body, I have been uh, out of my body in the in my normal size, maybe a foot or two lesser. Whenever I have traveled, I could not see my height and body height. So I don't know. But Gurudev did mention this to us once. He said, spirits can, I'm assuming that these are powerful spirits, can take a size, or can oscillate in a size between 2.5 or 2 inches to 20 feet. And the Virat Roop that Krishna showed, I believe, was around 20 feet. And because he was a very powerful saint, he could probably take that Virat Roop with his Nirman Kaya, and Arjun could see it in physical form. And most spirits cannot do that. Earning enough of afterlife dollar, you learn to flirt with death. Kavneet says that. Why do I get the feeling, Kavneet, that you put a little stress on the word flirt? Yeah, I think confidence of yourself. Yes, Kavneet has brought me to a very interesting point, if I may have all your permissions to, though it's not your question. One of the things that I believe Kavneet has brought out is self-love. You know, if you are dissatisfied with yourself, your afterlife is not a great one. If you accept yourself on an as-is, where-is basis, and that's just a dialogue, but it means a lot, by the way. So I won't explain it because it will take 15 minutes to explain that. But in one sentence, it means that if you accept yourself on an as-is, where-is basis, you're devoid of too much of guilt, you're devoid of pride, you're devoid of all these emotions, and you just are in the phase of acceptance. So if you accept yourself for what you are, if you respect yourself, and you love yourself, and you worship yourself. And when I keep talking to people about self-worship, I don't think they get it. But if you worship yourself, then the minute of your death will be a very powerful minute, because you already think about yourself as a deity. You already think about yourself as a part of the Almighty, or the Supreme Consciousness of the Paramatma, whatever. And so this concept that we have been propagating in the Atma Sutra of accept yourself, learn to respect yourself, then love yourself, and finally worship yourself, these are great ways to prepare for death. And please believe me, at the most what will happen, if I am wrong, nothing will happen. You will just become greater human beings. So please believe me, and please practice this. Gita says, can we visit departed loved ones in this life and after death? It's probably one of the worst questions in the planet, Gita Nair. I don't think you can come up with a worse question than this. First of all, how can you say loved ones? It means you're a person with a, I'm not screaming at you, Gita, but I need your permission. So I need your permission to be harsh with you, because if I'm harsh with you, it will get the meaning across to everybody else present. So can you just put me one of those thumbs up signs so I know, and please don't cheat somebody else, so that I have Gita's permission to be nasty with her. Gita, need permission to be nasty? Okay, that was a funny one. So, okay. So Gita, what do you mean loved one? The fact that you have asked a question that can we visit departed loved ones in this life and after death, it shows limitations in your mind. First of all, the movie of that loved one is over. And how can that loved one be the loved one? If you have these few people who are your loved ones, it means you're going to have a long journey ahead. I want to help you cut your journey down to lesser lifetimes, Gita. Please consider yourself to be part of everybody else, but adulterated everybody else. Please accept yourself as a soul or a spirit or a jivatma, which is nothing else but an atma with an ego. And an atma minus your ego, you're not jivatma. Your Atma. If you're Atma, you are in everybody. You're a part of every living creature, every living being, every life form. And if you are Atma and you identify with yourself as Atma, then you will learn not to love those one or two departed people who mean something to you, but you will learn to love life itself in others. Like I have a new family member. My wife didn't give birth to this family member. It's a squirrel. And now we have built a good relationship, and this squirrel must be accepting us as its parents, because it shouts and screams when it's hungry outside my window. And it's almost like like your kids cry when they're hungry, and mummy goes running around getting milk and this and that, putting it in bottle and covering bottle with handkerchief or whatever, and stuff like that. So here we are at attention every time this squirrel comes, and then lots of birds also come and eat the food that we give it. So we have to keep on replenishing it, so that the interim time when the birds are not stealing the squirrel's food, we can give it some food too. So I love that squirrel as much as I love most human beings, because I feel that love is not emotional, that love is not egoistic. It's just an acceptance of congruence. So please, please do not want to meet loved ones, and please allow them to continue their journeys in the later life. And please don't try to hold them down. And which is what we often do by remembering people who are dead, by crying about them, and all kinds of antics that we do. We actually trouble the spirits. How do we overcome guilt? Shulba wants to know, how do we overcome guilt? So Sulba, let me ask you a question. You can only have guilt as long as you have doership. Because guilt cannot come alone. Guilt will come with pride, or whatever the word for pride is. I am not very good at synonyms and antonyms. I lost my Renan Martin when in school. So one of you find the right word for it. But if I am prone to guilt and I am also prone to pride, it means I am prone to doership, and that means I disregard destiny. I disregard the plan I made, or the what the Buddhists call the blueprint after death, afterlife. They make a blueprint for their next lives, of what they need to suffer, what they need to learn, what cleansing they need to do, blah, blah, blah. So if you don't take doership, you will not take guilt. Priyanka, how do you earn for the afterlife at an exponential rate? Well, Priyanka, I think Seva is one way, which I think is the quickest, the most effective, and most economical way to prepare for the afterlife. Yeah. And Gyan. See, the problem about Gyan is Gyan reading the series of books called the Upanishads? No. Gyan is understanding the Upanishads, but reading it is not Gyan. Understanding the Upanishads theoretically is also not Gyan. It's just about knowing facts. Understanding the essence of what the Upanishad is saying and feeling that as a reflection within yourself, that is Gyan. Or what comes through from your spirit to you is Gyan. What your intuitive faculties manage to come up from within you. They manage to take out your conditioning or your stored sanskar. Whatever they can pull out of that is Gyan. Isn't guilt when you cannot forgive yourself, Jatin? Guilt is guilt, Jatin. And the point is, again, you're talking about forgive yourself. Then there is the you that needs to be forgiven, and the you that needs to forgive, and the act that you need to forgive yourself for. So there's a lot of doership you're talking about. If you're going to have doership, you're going to suffer. You're going to have attachments, you're going to have guilt, you're going to want to suffer, you're going to design suffering for yourself. Why do that, my friend? Ashwin Chabria. I have seen my relative dying on the deathbed in front of me, as it has been said that Yam Doot or our ancestors come to take us back. I have actually seen my close one shockingly seeing someone, still figuring out what he experienced. Maybe this saying is right. So I think Ashwin is saying, Ashwin, what happens is, see, again, death is a part of Maya. So, when we talk about this subject called Maya, we get into a mess. So Maya is a dangerous business because it defies everything. It denies all logic. It just completely annihilates spirituality into nothingness. It just negates all. So if you don't take Maya into account, then yes, a lot of people have experienced, Yamdoots, a lot of people have experienced ancestors. I think Kevalji, when he died, I remember him telling his grandson that I can see some people have come to take me, but I'm not going to go with them because they're not the right people and I don't want to go with them. So who are those people? He didn't explain, but I'm assuming there were some people who wanted to, ask him to join them or whatever, and he decided not to go. And he waited for some other, moment of time where somebody else he saw that gave him comfort. Because I wasn't a part of his experience, I may not be able to explain more than what I was told. Sunana says, I meant the death of the psyche, the self. Yeah, Sunana, that's a very heavy line you just put in there. Yeah. Death of the ego is the death of the psyche and the death of the self. See, death of the self is a wrong terminology, by the way. The death of the self means moksha. Because in my dictionary, self is the Jivatma. In fact, in my dictionary, the adulterated self is the Jivatma. The real self is the Atma. So, what cannot be, I don't think Jivatma can die. I think Jivatma can die, but Atma cannot die. Because the moment the Jivatma discards the Ahankar or the self image or the me principle, it becomes a part of the Atma. And if you call that death, it's death. But I don't call that death. I call it a merger. And so, death of the psyche. What does that mean? I think you're talking about the impressions in the mind is what I'm understanding of your sentence. I think you're talking about the conditioning of the mind. I think you're talking about the sanskars. And if that is what you're talking about, then Sunana, the whole purpose of life is the cleansing of that bowl full of those digital, miniature, millions of images or conditionings or sanskars or engrams. And cleansing that is probably what you're talking about as the death of the psyche. Timmy says, Pranam, if one is not the doer and our lives are destined as written, what action can we own which will help in the afterlife? There is confusion and would like clarity. Also will only intent help. If one is not the doer and our lives are destined as written, what action can we own which will help us in our afterlife? See, Timmy, whether one likes it or not, one is not the doer. It is just that one believes one is the doer and therefore one starts buying into all these positives and negatives, and that's why one uncleanses oneself and one increases one's adulteration and goes even further away from the purity of the Atma. So, accepting yourself as a doer is a bad idea anyway, regardless of the rest of the question. But what action can we own which will help us in the afterlife? So, Timmy, you actually brought a very confusing subject on board. So there are two concepts that one can look at, karma and no karma. If you are a non-doer, then whatever you have done earlier and you have stored as karmas and sanskars, you are stuck with that until you can annihilate that or reduce that or cleanse that with other means. But by and large, if you today take upon this, yourself, not only at the conscious level, this has to flow from conscious to subconscious to unconscious. And if you become a non-doer at all these three levels, then in that case, then you don't need any help in the afterlife. Na? But if you are a doer, then my humble request, and you're a chartered accountant, so I can understand your question comes from a part of your professional prowess. See, then in that case, Timmy, what you need to do is you need to make sure that your sales or your revenues are much higher than your expenditure. That means your trading account of this life has to have a lot more of revenue and a lot less of expenditure. And if that can be done, then that is what you carry to the afterlife, and therefore you get placed in much better positions. In fact, I recommend to most people that just keep on doing a lot of seva, keep on doing a lot of good karma, accept the concept of karma, accept doership, don't accept guilt, cheat yourself by not accepting guilt, psych yourself into not accepting guilt, be confused between doership and non-doership, whatever you want to do, but do a lot of good deeds. So in case you fail in your non-doership, at least you will succeed in your doership. I don't know whether I'm making sense, but I think what I said made a lot of sense to me. Ila says, what do we mean by we need power for death? What power do we need? Ila, there is something called an aura, which is actually a radiation. It is not power. It's a radiation of the potency of power within you. And that power that radiates out of you, and you can actually touch it, you can actually, clasp your hands towards each other. You can start feeling that aura, because it's like a static, mild static electricity. So that radiation of that aura, so how does power come? By seva, you become more powerful, because those good wishes that people give you are not for free. They contain an element of power in them, because that's how it gets formed into a good wish. It's like an ethereal product. A good wish is not a hypothetical product. It's an ethereal product, and so it is made of energy. And if you collect thousands and lakhs of those good wishes, your power increases. And so does your power increase when you practice tapasya and mantra vidya. And so does your power increase if your gunas are enhanced to more sattva, less tamas, and less rajas. So these are the ways in which you can attain that power, and you need that power because your spirit needs power to move, to function. I have been attacked by a spirit when I was I got out of my body because I was under attack, and I had a man-to-hand battle with the spirit. And if I did not have the power of Mahagayatri, that guy might have converted me into pulp. But because I had the power of Mahagayatri, which was completed as a mantra, and it was Siddh, a mantra with me, that I could convert that guy into, like a paper doll. And poor fellow, I don't think he got beaten up so badly ever. Not during life and not during death. So that power was definitely very helpful, and I recommend it to all of you. If death of the psyche is possible before the death of the physical body, and if that is one way to prepare for death, Sunena, why aren't you asking simpler questions? Okay. One guy did this. His name was Raja Janak. I haven't read the Ramayana, but I suspect even Ram did this. And of course, a lot of people like Guru Vasishtha, etc., were accomplished in this. But what Raja Janak used to do was, he had the difficulty of being a king. Now that goes with a lot of rubbish. Being a king is not an easy thing, because you have to punish people, you have to do this, you have to be judgmental, ye hai, wo hai, vagera, vagera. So what Raja Janak used to do was, he used to gaze into nothingness a foot away from his forehead. And with that, his mind was focused on that, his attentions were focused there. And so he could not kill his psyche, but he could suspend his psyche, and his thoughts were much lesser. And I'm assuming that's the best I can advise you to do. If there is something better than that, I have no clue. Ritu says, which mantra can I chant to attain the Shakti to prepare for death? Ritu, you'll have to write to answers at Hingori Sutras, and then somebody will call up and have a chat with you, and then we can take that forward. And we would love to take that forward and help you to, but we need to know a little more about you before we can talk about what mantra to offer, because there are half a dozen of them. Kavneet, how do you learn detachment? I find it very difficult to adopt this in my life. Of course, you will find it difficult to adopt detachment in your life. If it was so easy, then everybody would go and buy a detachment pill and be detached. So you have to work towards it, and the only way I understand, Kavneet, is knowledge, is gyan, is the understanding. Attachment is a sensory, is a result of sensory weaknesses, is a result of emotions, is a result of doership, and therefore these attachments happen. And in order to get detached, you have to understand the meaning of it. You have to understand the concept of life and death and role play. You have to understand that your father is not your father, your daughter is not your daughter, your husband is, okay, I won't say your husband is not your husband, that might sound like a blasphemous statement, but your husband is a husband in this life. He may not have been the husband in your last life or the next one. So when we understand role play, detachment becomes easy. If not easy, at least possible. It's my experience. In spite of Lord Krishna being with them, the Pandavas couldn't have moksha. But Yudhishthira. You see, I think this guy Arjuna bought doership, because he was in the state of dvand. Dvand is confusion. So Krishna might have explained the Gita to him, and he may have theoretically understood it, but I don't think he bought it fully. And so, as he didn't buy it, he had to relive many lives. And Gurudev showed, now I know you're not going to believe me, so don't believe me, but I believed in Gurudev immensely. In fact, somebody mentioned this to me, and then I clarified with a second person who also confirmed this to me. He said while they were driving from place X to Y, Gurudev stopped them and said, we are going to come to a place where you will see the Arjuna of the Mahabharata working on a lathe machine in this life. And he showed them this character who was like one of the, I don't know what they call them, blacksmiths and things like that. He was doing work with metal, typical village type of blacksmith, or small town type of blacksmith, maybe whatever, on a lathe machine, or I don't know, I didn't ask so many questions, but he said this is the guy who used to be Arjuna in his life. So what is Arjuna doing in this 19th or 20th century? This is now the 21st century, but I'm talking to you about a story of, say, 30 years ago. So he may be alive. If he was alive, I assume he would be about 80 now. But if he was not alive, then Arjuna was still alive 30 years ago or 20 years ago as a blacksmith. That means he must have bought himself a lot of guilt. Hari Menon, we have been told that we will not take this or that with us when we die. What exactly do we take with us when we die? Brilliant question. You take your pran, and you take your aura, and you take the Shakti, that your potency of power that you have, that your spirit has earned. And that's not a small thing. That's a lot. You said avoid guilt. Also you said must do things to increase Shakti, Seva, Mantra Vidya, etc. Therefore fear of death is above not accomplished. How to avoid guilt or fear of death if one hasn't done a lot and still be ready to die? Rakesh, you're not dead yet. So you can still do that. You can still do some good things. You can still psych yourself into believing that you've done a lot of good things. And secondly, you can attain knowledge by, well, even if you attain, because I know who you are, so I realize that with your background of your past lives, if you were to just convince yourself that, okay, in the next 1 year, I am going to become spiritually accomplished. I know you have the capability, I know you have the potency, but what I also do know is that you don't have the will. And you're an escape artist if you're not willing to commit yourself to yourself. So I recommend you commit yourself to yourself. Krishna Bhattar, if there are people dependent on you, then I fear death, otherwise not. What would you say? I can't say. I don't know who is dependent on you and how much. I mean, if you have a 2-year-old baby who's dependent on you, then I understand what you're saying. But if you have kids who are old enough to take over from you, whatever you do, if you're looking after people who are unwell and only you can look after them, and those kind of circumstances, I would say yes. But then I don't think fearing death helps. I mean, how will fearing death help to extend life? I mean, that question I don't understand, Mr. Butler. If you don't fear death, you'll still die at the same time. If you fear death, you'll still die at the same time. So where is this fear of death of any use to you? Except a psychological bomb which is meant to hurt you. And one more thing, Mr. Butler. There is no timing for death. There are breaths. The person has that many breaths in this life. You cannot live beyond those breaths. And therefore, when those breaths are over, you will die. Harleen, please do not talk about yourself dying. What will happen to us? We need you. So Harleen, I just want you to know that after death, there's a lot more free time. And you may not be able to speak to people on a telephone, but you're in a position, like look at Gurudev, he's more active after he died. I mean, he was active actually before he died also. But then he was one of those very, very hyperactive people who kept on doing things from morning to night, which most of us are not capable of doing. But after his death, he is all over the place. He's meeting people, giving visions, giving this, advising people what to do, saving people, healing people. God knows what all he does. So, dying does not mean non-existence, Harleen. Dying means just changing over from this body into a lighter one, a more ethereal one, and not sponsoring Air India, SpiceJet, and Indigo Airlines. Does afterlife also have a destiny? Of course, Preeti. If afterlife didn't have a destiny, then the Muhurat of death would not be important. It does have a destiny. Anita says, how to inculcate forgiveness and being guilty-free. So forgiveness is very nicely taught by Patanjali in a book called the Yoga Sutra, a book I recommend to you, Anita, and I recommend to everybody. This book called Yoga Sutra talks about a concept called Pratipaksha Bhavana, which means the equal and opposite thought. So every time you are upset with somebody, or cursing somebody, or angry with somebody, or criticizing somebody, if you use the reverse Pratipaksha Bhavana, and you can read about it, it's available on Google, then you will find it easier to forgive. Sonia says, what should be one's consciousness at the moment of death? What a brilliant question. The most brilliant question of the day, Sonia. Brilliant. Actually, the last minute of death is a very defining moment. So I've said this on many occasions. I don't think anybody got it. I said, I don't care how I live. For me, my last minute of life is the most significant. It's the defining moment. So let us say I have weaknesses. If I can discharge those weaknesses in the last day of my death, don't bet on it though. I'm just saying if. It's a very big word. If I can define myself as free of sensory weaknesses, or whatever you call it, if I can define myself as unattached, if I can define myself as not vengeful, if I can define myself as not fearful, if I can define myself as powerful, if I can define myself as not guilty, then in that case, Sonia, at the moment of death, the catapult ratio is very high. And probably I can overcome many of the negatives that I might have had to deal with if this defining moment had not happened the way I'm suggesting. Can you make it happen? No, you can't. But you can rehearse it, na? There is something called muscle memory. Try to use that. And if it works, then after you're dead, come and tell us. One more thing I forgot to tell you, Sonia, is please consider yourself totally disconnected just before you're dead. Just make sure that you have no brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, sons, husbands, or whatever. Make sure that you go alone so that attachments automatically diminish. What is a jinn? A jinn is a guy who has about 30, 40, 50, spirits who report to him. He's a kind of a chieftain in the afterlife. That's what a jinn is. But he's on earth because he has not got out of the earth plane. Reuben, we need you to guide us on the way forward and to live without fearing death. Sure, Reuben. Like I said, understanding of the subject will make the fear go away. If a person is ill in hospital and is being told he will get well soon, but factually he is sinking and he's probably realized that he's not going to make it out of the hospital ever, would that moment of death also be calm mind as you have just explained? I don't know what you mean. If I am in hospital and if everybody is giving me this fake smile and saying, "Sab theek ho jayega," the usual dialogue is, "Khabrane ki koi baat nahi hai, sab theek ho jayega." And in Delhi, the favorite line is, "Koi dikkat hi nahi hai." One of those dialogues. I am not one of those suckers who will buy that dialogue. If I know that I'm going to die, I'll accept that and I'll say, "Oh, sure, I'll get fine. Don't worry. We'll go and have ice cream. We won't have Baskin Robbins. We'll have more," or whatever crap I want to say. If they are pulling my leg, then I would be happy to pull their leg, provided I can talk. I don't need people's kya kehte hain, what is the word for it? Ashwasan. That's a beautiful word. I don't know where the hell it came from in my head. But that ashwasan I don't need. Why would you need it? If you are a strong person, lots of good things you have done, you have not only self-confidence, but you have self-love and self-appreciation, then why would you need people to give you this false hope of continuing to live? The word for that continuation of wanting to live is called asis. That's why the Sindhis say ashish do. They mispronounce the word and they probably don't understand the meaning of it. They probably think it means ashish do means some kind of blessing. But it's not that. Ashish is the desire of a person to live on and to continue that life. That's what it means. Vinay, at what month time soul enters a pregnant lady's body? Now, Vinay, to the best of my knowledge, a woman at a feminine soul at 3 months and a male soul at 4 months. But somebody mentioned to me, and I'm not willing to agree with that person. I'm just sharing this with you. You can decide whether you want to agree, disagree, believe, disbelieve. Somebody said to me that very powerful spirits, when I'm talking of powerful spirits, I'm talking about, say, Mahavir, or I'm talking about Buddha, Jesus, I'm talking about people like Gurudev. I don't know whether these people actually spend 3 to 4 months in the mother's womb, or do they get a proxy, or what else do they do? That I have no experience of. This is what I've heard. I'm sharing it with you. It's probably conjecture. Why do we take birth on first place? I understand that we have to clear karma, but before even we accumulate karma, why would one want? Hemo, this is the only question which I think I will never get an answer to. Actually, I do have an answer, but I'm not very happy with that answer. It's too theoretical and too metaphysical and too, profound and stuff like that. The whole profound answer to this is that the Supreme Consciousness had a modification. I would consider that to be an imperfection at the risk of being unpopular with the Supreme Consciousness. But I would still take that risk and say something which wasn't right happened in that Supreme Consciousness. Like my friend Raji Sharma was telling me today, he said, it's the same concept of a flickering of a flame in a room with no breeze or no wind in it. Or in a wind-free room, why does the fire flicker? So, that flickering is possibly a programmed defect of some sort that I don't know how to explain. But that's what happened, and a creator was created, who created over probably God knows how long, it might have taken years over it, who created the universe, who created, and he created the universe with thought. I mean, it was the solidification of thought that created the universe. Just like, I'm swaying a little to make you understand better, but I need to do that. Just like Vishwamitra, I believe, created a whole planet. Just like yogis create bodies called Nirman Kayas, and you can actually see the guy in Delhi while he is actually in Bombay attending a meeting. You see him in Delhi and Bombay at the same time, and it's happened with Gurudev a couple of times and with some of his other disciples as well. So that means that creation of thought actually led to the creation of this universe, and that's what explains Maya best. And that's how he created the animals, the plants, the leaves, the birds, the men, and whatever. And that's how creation happened. Now, how did human beings multiply? Well, possibly because there was an evolution of other species that became human beings and evolved to the level of human beings. And possibly those original human beings had the ability to, duplicate themselves or clone themselves or whatever. And that's how birth took place. Gurudev used to explain it in a very beautiful sentence called Ek se Anek and Anek se Ek. So it's almost like a game where you need to take birth in order to take moksha, which is the lack of birth and death, lack of life and death, or whatever you want to call it. So this is the game. I don't see the sense in it. I'm not even sure whether the Supreme Consciousness sees the sense in it, but this is how I think it happened. Rachna. Gurudev in his lifetime must have given spiritual experiences to many people. Why are people so inhibited in sharing their spiritual experiences with others? What a lovely question to ask, Rachna. I also can't understand this. Okay, let me give you Gurudev's own words on this. I was convinced that I'm a duffer. I was fully knowledgeable about the fact that I'm a duffer. I had only been to Gurudev for 2-3 years. Of course, he had made me learn a lot of things. He made me do a lot of practices. He made me do lots and lots of things happened. Many dreams, many that. But I still understood that I was nothing more than a duffer. And in that state of mind, I was called and summoned by him. And he said, "Hey, beta," in Punjabi, and I can see from your surname that you will understand Punjabi. He said, "Hun tu jaake gyan baant sakda hai." I almost died. I almost died in a laugh. I said, "मैं ज्ञान बांट सकता हूँ?" I said, "महाराज, मैं तो गधा हूँ. मैं कौन सा ज्ञान बांटूंगा?" I was actually imagining saying nay in a public place and saying ye gyan hai, something like that. It was so corny. His sentence was so corny, I couldn't believe it. Then he told me something. He said, मैं जानता हूँ तेरे पास कितना ज्ञान है और मैं जानता हूँ तू कौन है और तू गुरु है. तेरा काम है ये ज्ञान बांटना. It was completely, it was like I don't know if any of you have watched cricket in the earlier years, but it was one of those bouncers that broke Nari contractors' heads. I don't know who did it, Wellesley Hall or something like that, or Griffith or whatever, West Indian bowlers. But these guys used to throw these bouncers that would hurt people. And so, to me, that was like a bouncer that Gurudev threw at me. I was so upset when he told me that I could share knowledge, because I didn't have any. And then, I also believe that the Guru is always right, Rachna. And I started sharing my lack of knowledge, whatever little I could do, and hearsay, and some experiences that I had already started having, quite a few. And then it started growing. And I realized that when I shared knowledge, it reduced. But much later, that reduced knowledge enhanced to much more than what it was at point 0. People are afraid of sharing knowledge. They feel there are secrets. They feel that by sharing those secrets, they may annoy their Guru's spirit. And very often Gurudev would say, "Kisi ko batana nahi." But I don't think he meant it in the way people think. I don't think he ever was like that. Because he told me to go ahead and do this and he told others not to do it. So there's a confusion in our own approach to the whole thing. But I believe that sharing knowledge definitely makes you lose some amount of knowledge. It just disappears. It gets demagnetized from you. But later, because of the seva of that sharing knowledge, it's called Gyan Dan. Because of that Gyan Dan, finally, from other sources or from within, that knowledge becomes much greater. So last three questions. Saloni Chandalia, does traveling have anything to do with exhausting our good karmas? What do you mean traveling? Traveling means like from Delhi to Chandigarh, that kind of traveling, or like traveling astrally? What do you mean? If you're talking about traveling astrally, it's like going and brushing your teeth. So there is no. I think traveling has nothing to do with the exhausting good karma. Not at all. Do you agree that birth and death is not in our hands? Death is designated. Of course. Shalini Hathiramani, agree with you. We have to accept ourselves and love ourselves completely. And Shalini, can you say this every time you're on this chat, please? Because I am going hoarse trying to convince people to worship themselves. And in that book, Atma Sutra, right now, if any of you want it, you just write to Hingori Sutras or answers at Hingori Sutras, and they'll send you a free copy on a PDF. Read about it. Shalini, you are an amazing mind. And for you to have said this, kudos. Sir, it may not be easy to renounce life, but to renounce the rewards of life is renunciation itself. Why do I need to renounce life or renounce the rewards of life, Devraj? Why can't I just accept life and accept the rewards of life? And why rewards? What rewards? No, I think this renunciation and all is a very Jaini technique, and I think the Jains practice a lot of this. But then that's a different way they practice. There is a very hard ritual practice of spirituality. It's a brilliant religion, one of the most brilliant religions I think ever created. But can't we be a little easier? Do that Ganpati number, na, Devraj. Just do that little circle around the parent stuff. Why take a long approach? Mayank, if we accept karmas as our destiny, then how can we change our destiny in this lifetime? Or we don't need change it, but accept it. How does fortune favor the brave? Are you trying to include a couple of movie names in your sentence, Mayank? If we accept karma as our destiny, how does fortune favor the brave? Where is the bravery part? How can we change our destiny in this lifetime? Or we don't need to change it, but I think we just need to accept our destiny, Mayank. And I guess if you want to call that bravery, if you want to call acceptance bravery, then yes, fortune does favor the brave. I guess you're right. How do we overcome our fears? Knowledge and understanding is the only way to overcome fears. That I know, Mayank. I have no other idea. If self-love is difficult to feel, what does it mean, Ji? See, self-love is very difficult because of all the thoughts we get, and we take ownership of those thoughts and the guilt that we do, because our destiny is not in our control. Things happen through us, by us, to us, and we are not able to design everything that happens to us or by us or through us. And therefore, there's a frustration level in that, and that's what makes us unsettled in our minds. And that's how it is so difficult to love ourselves. No, but I'm saying cut all that. I'm saying just go down to cut the chase and say, listen, I am living a life which is destiny. That destiny was pre-designed, and God knows how many lifetimes ago. So why should I take guilt? Why should I take ownership? Why can't I just have a free ride? When everything is destiny and past, present and future has happened at the same time in a moment, where is the question of earning in past, present and future afterlife, which has already happened? Yaar, ye sab baatein hoti hain. I mean, when we are talking about earning, we are actually just conditioning our minds. I mean, like seva is something which everybody does anyway. But they don't do enough. So maybe it is their destiny to do a lot more. And maybe that destiny gets fulfilled and triggered off by someone like us talking about it in some kind of a group like this. That's how it happens. Loving oneself is loving and valuing the Paramatma in you. Perfectly said. We need to be gentle, loving, caring, and accepting the soul the way it is as the most powerful and essential part of us that, that completes our existence. No question about what you're saying, Sandhya. Perfect. It's picture perfect. Devika, is it of value to the spirit to learn and truly practice non-doership and eventually bring your karma to level 0, neither good nor bad, rather than accumulate good karma? Yeah. Or is there a greater benefit to the soul to leave the cycle of birth and death? So, Devika, I just wanted to give you a technical point here. There is something between life and death and moksha, and that is mukti. Mukti is when you have attained quite an amount of, you know, goodies, cookies, brownies, or whatever, and you can exist for hundreds of years without needing to be born, with the semi-cleansed karmashay or soul or whatever you want to call it. So there is that mukti thing, and most souls like Gurudev, like Jesus, like Ram, all these people have taken mukti. Gurudev is still active, Jesus is still active, and actually Ram has also been active, at least till 30 years ago, I know. But yeah, so I guess many spirits that live in these higher dimensions, the Brahmalok, the Vishnu Lok, the Shiv Lok, the Guru Lok, or Swarg Lok, or whatever loks, these guys don't need to be born again and again. They come for missions and they come for purposes. Sunil Kamath, is it possible for the person who is about to pass away know that the time for him or her to go is near? No, it's not easily possible. Indicative through words, lines that they have to tend, mention to the family or remembering us, that they tend to mention to the family or remembering or speaking to those. There's a lot of conjecture that happens in this, Sunil. A lot of people say, I've been telling everybody that I'm dying. I want to die, I want to die, I want to die. So by now I should have died at least 200 times. And but that's just my wish. By saying it, it doesn't help me die. I still have to finish the breaths. Can we change destined death by doing good karma? Yes, Vishal. Power of the Guru that I have seen had the power to extend life, and I've seen that happen in many cases. Now, it's not a very common thing that he did, but I've seen it happen in many cases, so I know it's technically feasible and possible. Is Hanumanji the only god that's still on earth in this form? Why? I mean, I don't know why you're calling Hanumanji a god, Vikram. Hanumanji was a person, and he was a deity, and he was a very powerful spirit. So there are people like Parashuramji who are also immortal. And there is also, what is that guy, one of the villains of the Mahabharata, I've forgotten his name, anyway, can't remember his name. Guy whose money was taken away from his head. He's also a very powerful soul. So there are many of these people who are alive. But why they are alive is my question. I mean, I don't understand why they are alive. And why do they need to be alive? That is something only they can answer, and I hope they will. Maybe we can invite them next week. What all is included to be called seva? Radhika, do me one humble, my humble request, do me a favor. You know, what you can do is just write to us at Hingori Sutras. Let us send you a PDF of Karma Sutra. Just read it. There are about 18 things which we feel are necessary as parts of seva. Please do that. But in concept, Radhika, let me give you the principle of it. Obliging others is seva. You can even do it with humor. Making people laugh is seva. Being nice to people is seva. Offering somebody a glass of water, there's hundreds, and doing things for others at a cost to yourself is seva. Arti says, if you feel something is right for you, but it hurts someone else, what do you do? Is it being selfish? Arti, it's a very subjective question, don't you think? I mean, how could one answer that? If you think it's selfish, it's selfish. If you think it's not, it's not. If another person thinks it's selfish, that person is looking at it from personal perspective. So you have to see. So the best way to examine this Arti is to not be Arti and to not be the other person, is to be a third person, then evaluate both the viewpoints and then see which one sounds better to you, and that's the right thing. Before one can overcome fear of self's death, one has to overcome fear of death of loved ones, or overcome the fear others may harbor about your death. How do you do that? Oops, that's a tough one. Lalit, that's very tough one, because see, the problem is, are you going to be able to convince people not to be emotional, not to be attached, to look at life as a role play? I don't know. If they're able to see it like that, then I think you will be able to help them overcome that. If you can, so Gyan, I guess, is the only way, Lalit. The only way is to understand things, and then you have to explain those things that you understand to others. And if they can buy into your understanding, then I think that's one way you can help them to overcome your death or their death or whoever's death. Karan Behal, good evening. How does one break free from negative energies that prevail in one's present life? Does ignoring or not believing in negative energies reduce the ill effects? No, Karan, I think this is a dangerous question and I can't answer it, and I don't want to answer it because I don't know what you're talking about, and just giving you a generalized, casual answer is not what I'd like to do. So Karan, there is a email address called answers@Hingori Sutra. Please put down the details and we will answer that confidentially. Abhi Kamdar, we have been influenced by the Western school of thought for so many centuries. Don't we need a more Indian spiritual school of thought and university schools imparting such knowledge to people? Of course, you're absolutely right, Abhi. We do need, we look at it logically. Forget about being Indian. Let us think that you're not Indian. Let us think you're, I won't say Chinese, let us think you're Vietnamese, all right? Even if you're a Vietnamese, Abhi, you do realize that this is the country with the maximum amount of heritage, the maximum amount of learning, the maximum amount of wisdom, much more wisdom of that time than of this time. So if that wisdom is not given attention to by your own politicians in this country, by your own ministers of various things like education and whatever other ministries are involved, I don't know. But if they are not able to look at that sincerely and seriously, yeah, we're missing out. In fact, I'm sure, Abhi, if you were a prime minister or if you were a minister, you would have probably done one thing. You would have not only made spirituality a curriculum for schools and colleges and postgraduate courses, you would have probably exported it. You would have probably hired the world's best, coaches to design, courses based on Indian spirituality. I know I could do that. I know you could do that. But the point is, who's going to do that? So, Khyati's question was, what can I do to die a calm death? Khyati, to die a calm death, 2-3 things are required. One is, anxiety has to be reduced. Anxiety means controlling of thoughts. Controlling of thoughts means wisdom, the observational power of being a self-observer. I would suggest, Khyati, please ask for a copy of Atma Sutra to be mailed to you at no cost, and please read it. It will answer not only this question but many questions. So if you practice mantra vidya, if your gunas are brilliant, if you have attained knowledge and gyan to some extent, I'm not saying that you become a third eye practitioner, but I'm saying, if you start understanding things, intuitiveness and things like that develop, then and knowledge happens to you, then that death will be much calmer. Yeah, that will be much calmer. Why do spirits try to attack only few and not all? That is an amazing question by Amit. Actually, Amit, it's circumstantial. I don't think spirits go around looking for people and say, okay, this guy is worth attacking, this guy is not. So, one is weakness will be a criteria. Number two, technical errors by people. First of all, most of us cannot sense spirits. Most of us means most of you can't sense spirits. And therefore, even if there was a spirit attacking you, you probably wouldn't know. And you would only know if you saw something very physical happening. But very often the spirits attack in very strange ways. And this is a very long subject, Amit. But they attack people who I think they find it convenient to attack, or who they feel are weak. I mean, that's not a perfect answer, but I think in a short time that's the best. So I'm sorry, but I think we need to call it a day. And I'm very grateful to you. I'd like to say thank you to all of you for participating in this program. Every time we talk, I learn a lot, and I'm sure some of you do learn a few things too. And let's all work together to make our lives more productive and more spiritual. And let us try to fulfill the purpose of our life and not fulfill the purposes that we were not born for. And with that, good night.